In the history of Hollywood movies, a decade that's become particularly well known for the production of fantasy and science fiction films is the 1980s. Largely spurred by the success of blockbusters like Star Wars and Superman in the late 70s, studios large and small went all in on appealing to audiences who had gained the thirst for space adventures and stories set in far from magical kingdoms. And one summer that was particularly notable for having one fantasy and sci-fi release after another was 1982. So many highly regarded films in these genres, both massively popular as well as those that would eventually attain cult followings, made their debuts at this time and show the continued viability of these sorts of movies, and I thought it'd be fun to look at how this summer panned out for many of them. The first major fantasy movie of summer in 1982 was Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This started things off with a right foot, exciting viewers with its violent story, and was the movie that turned Schwarzenegger into a massive star. Although it only made $39 million at the North American box office, slightly short of doubling its $20 million budget, Universal Pictures nonetheless made back the money from their investment in the movie. It would also become a big seller on home video, as audiences really took to this Austrian accented hero out for revenge. The following week would see the American release of Mad Max 2, although it was not referred to by that title. Warner Brothers decided to market the movie by not giving any indication that it was a sequel, and changed the title to The Road Warrior. That did not hurt the film though, as people were able to get into the post-apocalyptic setting and wild car chases. And when they did find out it was a sequel, it likely led to more people eventually renting the first movie. Something that happened a few times during the summer was two big genre films opening on the same day, and the first of these happened on June 4th. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was a big deal for Paramount, and a test to see if the adventures of the Starship Enterprise were still viable on the big screen. Even though Star Trek the Motion Picture was profitable, it did not reach the numbers Paramount was hoping for, and the film was also criticized for being slow and boring. They hired a team who could bring the sequel in at a lower budget and who would try to make it appeal beyond Trekkers. Star Trek II pulled off both of those tasks, and unlike its predecessor, it became a significant crowd pleaser. While it was a direct follow-up to the television series episode Space Seed, audiences did not have to be familiar with it in order to get invested in the battle between Kirk and Khan. The success of this movie meant more sequels with these characters will be made, which is good considering it ended on a cliffhanger. The same week as Star Trek II saw the release of the ghostly horror movie Poltergeist, directed by Tobe Hooper and conceived and produced by Steven Spielberg. Its story of a family who has to deal with spooky ghosts was highly regarded and would have impressive staying power over the summer. It would make for an interesting pairing with another film that had Spielberg's involvement and was about strange occurrences in suburbia. That film is, of course, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, which opened the following week. Despite Spielberg's track record, the expectation in Hollywood was that this family movie about a friendly alien would maybe do fine, but not as much as Raiders of the Lost Ark the previous summer. The head of Columbia Pictures, which was originally going to produce E.T. before selling the rights to Universal, even referred to it as a wimpy Walt Disney movie. In the end, E.T. would become an absolute phenomenon that summer, appealing to everyone of every age. It was not only the family film of choice, but was able to get the attention of teenagers, adults without children, and grandparents. Everyone was just charmed by that squishy-looking alien. It would spend 6 consecutive weekends at number 1, and even when it dropped to number 2 on the charts, it would immediately return to number 1 the following week. It would take until October for E.T. to leave the top 2 positions, not that it relinquished them for long. E.T. would eventually jump ahead of Star Wars to become the top-grossing film up until that time. Spielberg seemed to really tap into what audiences in 1982 wanted and provide them the escape that people craved from the movies. The popularity and appeal of that movie does not seem to have lessened since its original release, and is now placed alongside The Wizard of Oz and several Disney classics as that sort of timeless family film parents make sure to show their children. Although one begins to wonder if the dominance of E.T. would affect the other fantasy and sci-fi movies opening in its wake. The movie that to follow E.T. the next week was Clint Eastwood's techno-thriller Firefox. Although admittedly was not competing for the same audience, and the early 80s was a time when several films could easily coexist despite a massive blockbuster in the marketplace. Even though critics were not particularly fond of Firefox, it still pulled in decent business. Less rosy was what happened to the big science fiction movies that concluded June. One was Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which seemed like a movie that could excite viewers. It was from the director of Alien and starred Harrison Ford, who was already a big star. Ladd Company head Alan Ladd Jr. even released it on the 25th, specifically because he saw that number as a good luck charm, following the success of Star Wars and Alien. However, Scott had also been ordered to add a narration and a new ending to the film to make it more commercially friendly. Turns out that may have been a detriment, as Blade Runner was dismissed by critics and moviegoers were largely disinterested. The film quickly left theaters, but thankfully found a much bigger audience on home video. A director's cut closer to Scott's vision without the narration and that ending was also released to much bigger acclaim and appreciation. The other science fiction movie on June 25th was John Carpenter's The Thing. Universal pretty much did that meme about playing both sides, so that I always come out on top, by releasing a friendly alien and an evil alien movie in the same month. While they ended up with their biggest hit ever with E.T., The Thing went in a complete opposite direction and was met with indifference. Critics hated the movie, seeing it as nothing more than a violent and gruesome shockfest, and audiences were similarly repulsed by the imagery and stayed away. Universal even decided they no longer wanted Carpenter to direct the film version of Stephen King's Firestarter and pulled him off the film. It really affected him personally, but thankfully The Thing would grow a much more appreciative audience on video, and it's now regarded as a horror classic. Both Blade Runner and The Thing are examples that just because a movie does not immediately take off and grab the interest of viewers does not mean it cannot eventually find people who appreciate what the director set out to do. Case in point is the next fantasy film of summer 1982, Don Bluth's animated film, The Secret of NIMH. This was probably one of the more ambitious films to open that summer, as it was an independent film that wanted to take animation to new places. However, MGM did not give the film much of a push. It only opened on 88 screens on its opening weekend, and its widest release was in 700 theaters. Even though it never even made it into the top 10, The Secret of NIMH was able to gross almost $15 million domestically, which is not bad for a non-Disney animated feature produced independently, released with barely any marketing, and with families giving most of their attention to E.T. That number also more than doubled its production budget, and its television airings and home video release led to it becoming a favorite among 80s children. Spielberg would even see The Secret of NIMH and loved it, leading to a collaboration with Bluth. Disney would unveil that big summer release next with Tron, starring Jeff Bridges as a video game developer gets sucked into a computer. This was part of Disney's drive to attract the teenage crowd to their films, and it seemed to have the makings of a big hit, especially with the use of state-of-the-art computer-generated effects. Tron is sometimes miscategorized as a flop, but it actually did pull profit in its original release, grossing $50 million on a $17 million budget. It stuck around in theaters for a while, and it even inspired a popular arcade game. However, Disney was still disappointed in the grosses as they expected a lot more, and Tron was one of a number of films that led to the creation of the Touchstone Pictures labels, where they released more mature films without carrying the stigma of the Disney name. Tron sold well on video, developing a significant cult following, and its impact on special effects and computer animation will be massive. Raiders of the Lost Ark would return to theaters the next week, and then after came the low-budget sci-fi comedy Zapped, about a teenager gains telekinetic powers. Critics hated it, and MC Pictures probably expected it to quickly disappear from theaters, but it seemed to find appeal with young moviegoers and quietly got to almost $17 million, as it played on any number of screens. Not counting a re-release of Star Wars, there would not be another fantasy or science fiction film that summer until The Beastmaster opened on August 20th. Released by MGM, it did not seem to make much of an impact and lost money on its original theatrical run. However, it would end up one of those movies that was frequently aired on television, especially cable channels like HBO and TBS. It was even followed by 2 sequels and a television series. As you can see, 1982 was an impressive summer for sci-fi and fantasy, and even films that not initially do well would pick up steam on later revenue streams. Whether you wanted to see a movie about beings from outer space or something more magical, genre lovers in 1982 would often find something to watch every week at their local multiplex. See you next time.